Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Jeff Gold, who is the Grammy Award-winning music historian, archivist, executive, and author of the 2020 book, Sittin' In. This new book is very welcome and needed in this COVID-19 world of no live jazz. The book is a rare collection of more than 200 full-color and black and white souvenir photographs and memorabilia that bring to life the renowned jazz nightclubs of the 1940s and 50s, featuring exclusive interviews with the likes of Quincy Jones, Sonny Rollins, Moran, and more. It is meticulously laid out and extensively researched, and it serves as a deep dive into the amazing period of American cultural history. These venues and this music was among the best vehicles for integration that the country ever had. It celebrates the audience. It celebrates diversity. It's a wonderful book during a time of no live jazz. So please get to know Jeff, this book, and quite a bit more during this illuminating conversation.
How are you?
Hey, man, I'm great. I'm a lot better now that I read Sittin' In. That was such a needed slice of missing action that we've had for like 8.5 months.
Well, thank you so much. Couldn't be weirder, huh?
Yeah, this book, speaking of, is amazing. I'm very, very gracious to you and the publisher for sending me a copy. I blazed through it. I loved it. And I want to just start out first and foremost by asking you, I'm always interested in the inception of the idea to the actual fruition when the book landed in your hands. Kind of how did that unfold for you?
So I had done 2 music-related books prior to this. And, my bread and butter business is selling music collectibles and doing consulting for musicians' archives, essentially. And I had said to my wife, I'm never doing another book. They're just way too much work. And she kind of laughed and said, you've said this before. In my music collectibles business, I was reintroduced to a guy I'd met one time before who had a huge collection of jazz memorabilia. And I spoke to him on the phone, and it sounded like something I wanted to pursue. So I drove a few hours to go to pick him up at his house. And then he said, the stuff's all in a series of safe deposit boxes in my bank, which is about half an hour away. So we went to his bank, and we went into one of those kind of 5 by 5 foot rooms they have that you can take your safe deposit box to in the bank. And he disappeared and came back a few minutes later with a hand cart with 5 or 6 very large safe deposit boxes filled with treasure. And this guy had been collecting for about 30 years, and it seemed like it wasn't organized in any way. It was just kind of, he'd open a box and we'd start taking stuff out, and it looked like it was in the order of when he'd purchased it. So there might be 10 photos, 8 by 10 photos, and then some handbills, and then some unused tickets, and then some autographed stuff, and then a poster. And eventually we came to one of these photos from a jazz club, one of these souvenir photos. And I don't remember what club it was, but it might have been Birdland, and I saw the Birdland artwork, and I opened it up, and here's a photo of the patrons. And I'd seen things like that from, cruise ships or nightclubs, but never from jazz clubs. I thought, well, that's pretty good. And so I put that in the pile of stuff I wanted to buy, and then maybe 2 or 3 minutes later I found another one, and 5 minutes later another one. 3 or 4 hours in, I had maybe 50 of these set to the side, and I thought, God, if I've never seen one of these in collecting and buying and selling this stuff for 40 years, they can't be that well known. I think these should be a book, but, I'm never doing another book. 2 or 3 times I went down to visit this guy. We went to his bank safe deposit box, and at the end I had about 150 of these, along with a lot of other stuff. But I put the photos in a pile, and they were sitting on a bookcase, and I was just kind of engaging in a staring contest with them. And I started doing some internet research and saw there really aren't any collections of these online, and remarkably, there aren't any overall books on jazz clubs, which really surprised me. Nobody had ever done one. There were ones about specific clubs like Birdland or ones about the Chicago scene, but never a survey of book on jazz clubs. These things kind of stared me down over about 6 months, and eventually I decided the historian side of me won out over the I don't want to do the work side of me, and I thought, people need to see these things. They're so incredible. So that's the origin.
That's wonderful. And the thing that I find interesting about this is someone that really looks into the history of jazz and kind of digs through in my own way. I don't know that I've ever heard or seen or had kind of the language of celebrating the audience the way you do. Now, when I talk to musicians, they are very clear about the fact that the interplay with the crowd's huge. I mean, if they're having a conversation and the crowd's a part of that conversation, there's no way you can separate either of them. They have to be a melding, and it has to be a part of it. But those direct pictures of all of that, like all of the lore that we have fell in love with jazz, with the smoke trails and the booze and the smiles and the swing, it's like all of those things you can just see in each of those photos. Was that really kind of a central aim for you to celebrate the audience?
Yeah, well, that was kind of the thing that haunted me. I started thinking about it, thinking, you know, we've seen pictures of Birdland, but they're pictures of the empty club or the performers on stage, or most of all, people standing outside the line or the marquee, you know, the awning outside, but you never see the fans. And you know, people like Sonny, who I asked about this, who said, yeah, you're playing in a small club, that audience is a band member. You're engaging directly with them and their energy. And as I started thinking about it, I thought, you know, you read people saying this, but you never really see who was there, ever. And these pictures kind of turn the camera around from the people photographing the musicians on stage to musicians' point of view of the people sitting at the tables. And it was interesting, you know, when I sent examples of these to the people I was interviewing before the interviews, you know, Sonny said, yeah, this is really bringing back memories, you know, remember this phenomenon. Dan Morgenstern, same thing. But I showed him to Jason Moran, who's, you know, generations younger. He said, I literally have never seen one of these in my life. I didn't know these existed, and they're so blowing my mind because as much as I document my career and spend time thinking about and looking at the history of jazz, it's never dawned on me that nobody is documenting the audience. And here they are, a document of who the people were. So, yeah, that was really kind of amazing to think, as much as we read about it and talk about it and think about it, you never see it. And now we can see it.
The thing that's interesting is the breakdown of the cities. You know, of course, from Kansas City, there was a part of me that was thinking, from what I know of being in Kansas City and the lore, I expected there might be more in there. And I think it's kind of the way the world perceives jazz. I think it's New York, and then it kind of funnels down into New Orleans and other cities. What are your thoughts on kind of how much ink was associated with each, and is that a precursor to any kind of historical statement on how important each of these cradles of jazz were?
In no way is it that. It's purely what I could find. Because the book, even though it's got 60,000 words, it's got 220 illustrations, something like that. And to me, a lot has been written about these subjects in these clubs in different places. Not a lot. A lot's been written about some of these clubs. Virtually nothing's been written about others of these clubs. But the music is really well documented. But the thing that I felt I hadn't seen anywhere else were these audience photos. And so the amount of weight given to each city is purely what I had or could find in terms of illustrations. So, the big glaring omission in the club is there's no Philadelphia, but I just couldn't find any photos of audience members in Philadelphia from clubs, and I tried. I contacted a jazz critic there, I contacted some institutions there, and I just couldn't find them. And it may just not have been a phenomenon there as it was in New York, where it was a really ubiquitous thing that these clubs would have enough photographers. And Kansas City, those were the only two things I could come up with illustrating, and I'm guessing that for whatever reason, it being a wide-open town or people being more concentrated on booze, I wasn't able to locate other illustrations. And it's funny, it seems, one review I had from somebody in Boston seemed to take that really personally, and it's like, well, there were over 100 clubs there. Absolutely. I just couldn't find anything to illustrate them beyond what I had. And I had an enormous amount from New York. I think that the phenomenon of audience photos was a much bigger thing there, and obviously there were more jazz clubs there than anywhere else in the period of time I'm writing about.
Right on. So, I noticed that Henry Rollins had a quote. There was a lot of heavy hitters that have talked about this, and I think that's the thing that's been what I've noticed being, involved as a jazz journalist, so to speak, is that this book has created a lot of press, and I think it's like we talk about how bad this time is as far as musicians aren't able to get out. There's so much going on, but I think there's so many levels of what we're going through, right, that could be construed as silver linings. Do you see your book and the way that this has heralded so much attention as a silver lining and kind of a blessing? Because, you said you weren't going to write another book. So how do you view the fact that this is out and getting the positive attention it's getting?
I'm super happy about it. It was a 4.5-year slog. It just took an enormous amount of time to research. Some of these clubs are virtually undocumented, while others of them there's an enormous amount written about. Obviously, I didn't imagine at any point in this game that this would come out during a pandemic when jazz clubs are closed. A lot of people have expressed to me that they're really happy that this gives them a deep dive into a culture that's on hold right now, and I'm grateful for that. It certainly wasn't anything I saw coming.
Well, I think that's the beauty of this, and I've even noticed with musicians that are releasing material, particularly live albums. I think there's a stopgap right now where people are wanting to feel connected to something that just unfortunately has been kind of, put on hold for quite a while right now. What is the most surprising review, whether musician, critic, that you got that you just kind of has blown you away about this?
That's a really good question. Let me think about that. Well, off the top of my head, I worked for A&M Records, which was owned by Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, and I was very friendly with both of them, but, I left their employ 30 years ago. And I'm in sporadic touch, and I figured Herb would like it, so I sent him an email just asking for his home mailing address so I could send him a copy. And he said, I'll buy one. And I said, no, I want to send it to you. I sent it to him, and he sent me the most effusive, wonderful, warm email about how just perfect this was. And I know he's a guy of very exacting taste. It was just so effusive, and I said, hey, could I use this as a quote to publicize book? And he said, absolutely, anything. I'd be so proud to be associated with it. So that was just personally really heartwarming to, have somebody that really, as a kid, The Lonely Bull, the first Herb Alpert, the Tijuana Brass single, was the first record I became obsessed with, a 7 or 8 year old. And to work for the guy and know how exacting he is and have him just kind of explode with enthusiasm for this a number of times was really personally gratifying. But all of it, to just be able to provide people with a little bit of distraction right now, as you are, makes me feel fantastic. And I'm very proud of the way it came out. So,
the one thing, too, that I think about when I see all those pictures, and it's like all of those faces that I see are faces that are older right now. There's so much that have changed. But that was popular music at the time. When we look at these kids today, as they follow whatever MTV or anything that's online that's coming out, it's like everything's changed so rapidly. Even from the MTV generation. But I think that was the time when jazz was popular music. Those were the kids. So in essence, I guess my question is this almost going to be a time capsule for when we look back at MTV and wonderment when we think, wow, we were all running inside to see the premiere of Hot for Teacher from Van Halen. These guys were, running out to clubs to see these concerts, and it was like somebody was taking a picture of them, which you wouldn't really see much of that unless it was kind of a vintage retro place. But that doesn't happen anymore. Do you see, how does that make you feel as that being a time capsule of popularity for one of the most popular American inventions ever, which is jazz?
Well, I have a number of thoughts on that question. First, you look at pictures. My favorite picture in the book is the first picture in the book, which is Charlie Parker with a couple at the Royal Roost in the 40s. And Charlie Parker looks just sly and very kind of happy. And the couple look thrilled to be sitting with Charlie Parker. And so you think this is 1948. Charlie Parker is just a very popular jazz saxophone player at that time. He's not a legend. He's not an icon. He's very much alive and looks in that photo very together. And here you have a white couple posing with this African-American musician who isn't yet a god. And everybody looks thrilled. And I started thinking, when would you see black people and white people posing together for a photograph earlier than that? It's really unusual, and it's kind of a primordial selfie, celebrity selfie. That was something that really captured my imagination. Another thing is, after I spoke to Sonny, I thought, he was describing how he would go to the clubs on 52nd Street as a teenager and sneak in at the very tail end of the 40s, and he'd draw a mustache on with eyebrow pencil so he'd look older. And Dan Morgenstern, same thing, started going to these clubs in 1947 as a 17-year-old, so he was underage too and sneaking in. And I realized, those guys are both 90, so to have gone to a club at the tail end of the 40s, as young as possible, you're 90 or older. It's going to be impossible to get first-hand accounts of what that was like in 10 or 15 years, because there won't be anybody alive anymore. And I thought, if each of the cases of the people I talked to who were there, Quincy a little later in the early 50s in New York, but as a teenager in Seattle and Boston, I thought, I don't think these guys have ever done an interview before where they're talking about jazz clubs. It's kind of a territory for them, and I think Quincy but especially Sonny and Dan were really effusive about it. It was like they wanted to talk about a subject that nobody had asked them about. And I thought, I've kind of captured some history here that's going to be impossible to capture pretty soon. And so I was really grateful for the opportunity to speak to these people who had such great and evocative memories before it becomes impossible to document this scene from a first-hand standpoint.
When I talked to Joe Lovano about a month into it, he was in his cabin up in New York, and we were just talking about the possibility of creating a new theme. Like Charlie Parker and Coltrane, or not even so much Charlie, but kind of Charlie, and Miles, clubs were getting burnt down. And at the time, they were inventing bebop. They were doing a Love Supreme, and they had no commercial forces, no record labels telling them to do that. They felt it. And I'm thinking right now, as we go through all this, and as an artist, this has to be one of the most stirring times in history to really invent and get yourself to a point where you can create something. And I asked Maxine about that. What do you think about inventing something new? And she said, I'm not worried about something getting created that's new. I want people to look back. I want them to look at and listen to people like Louis Armstrong and all of these cats that did what they did. Let's study what these guys did. We know what's going on right now. And it was the first, most unique perspective that I had heard on all of that. When I was reading this book, and that interview coincided with you sending this to me, isn't that an interesting notion based on what you put in this book?
Super interesting notion. And I'm really, I joke to my wife, I'm kind of one-dimensional. I read only music books. I listen to records all day long. I read music magazines and newspapers and websites. And I'm well-informed. I'm interested in other things, but that's my comfort food. And I even go back and look at my book because it's, been such a long slog and read things that I didn't remember writing, but once I read it, I do. And I'm very obsessed is even the word, is the right word, with documenting this stuff before it becomes too late. And my book before this couldn't be more different. It was about the Stooges, Iggy Pop's band that invented punk rock. And I did it with him, and I interviewed him, and he remarkably for anybody, but especially for a guy who lived large portions of his life, and certainly all of the life of the Stooges, being high, he's got an unbelievable memory, and that, too, was a book that's kind of nailing down history in a really specific way before it gets too late. And I think as a big consumer of that kind of thing, I'm really feel very fortunate to have been able to play my part in a tiny way of getting the story down before it becomes impossible to get the story down. Eventually decided I had to do this because I was staring at these things that, when somebody like Jason Moran, who is a brilliant guy with an incredible grasp of jazz history, looks at these and says, I have literally never seen one of these before. I didn't know they existed. And it is blowing my mind so much, and you can see that in his interview, I think, wow, I really have kind of stumbled upon something that needed to be out there and people needed to be able to see. It really is a kind of hidden world.
And it's beautiful. It's beautiful that it's exposed. And for someone that loves the history of jazz, when I see those old black and white photos, and there's not a whole lot, I mean, there is and there isn't, the fact that you unearthed so many of these, and especially during this time, it's such a great fork in the road of our history here with jazz and music and life. And with that in mind, I got a question for you. When we do return to the stage, when we are comfortable enough and we get back to some level of, like, you know, an audience and the musicians, what do you hope we all realize about this time away from live music and jazz?
I don't have a pat answer for that, but I was saying to my wife yesterday, at the end of all this, I don't want to feel like I've put my life on hold or I've wasted any of this time. I feel like I'm pretty good on that measure. I'm keeping very busy, and there's lots of really interesting stuff to dive into, like your radio show and hopefully like my book. And so I think that maybe Mrs. Gordon is right. You know, it's a good time to look at the past and study it and see what lessons can be gleaned from it. I'm a hopeful, optimistic person, and I feel like we, as horrible as it is in America right now, happily there's good news on the vaccine front, and we will get back to being able to go see live music and play live music and experience all those things that we haven't been able to do. But I hope that, and I think it will, I think there's going to be an explosion of pent-up interest in things that people haven't been able to do. And hopefully that will help a lot of these clubs and musicians make up for this lost time in a bit of a way. And that, you know, I'm optimistic that things will get back to normal eventually. And like the rest of the world, I can't wait.
Me too. Absolutely. Jeff, thank you for opening up. Thank you for the book and your insights, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for your interest and your kind words, Joe. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Again, thanks for the book, and thanks for taking time out. I appreciate it.
Joe, a total pleasure to speak with you, and thanks again for your interest and continued best wishes for sanity and a return to normality.
Yes, sir. Same to you, man. Take it easy.
Take care.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest authors and players in New York, New Orleans, L.A., Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jeff for his time and contribution to the world of jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.